Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Digital Leader Show. We're live every other Wednesday at noon Eastern, 9 Pacific, talking key issues and news at the intersection of business and technology in hopes of making you a better digital leader. Today, we're discussing AI collusion and price fixing, plus other headlines for digital leaders. I'm Dan Goodstein. I head up ERPA AI, the Institute for Robotic Process Automation and Artificial Intelligence. We're a professional association, media, and peer-to-peer research network, providing education, networking, and advice to over 130,000 members worldwide, all around automation, enterprise AI, and digital transformation. Check us out at erpaai.com. My co-host is Carlos Alvarenga, a researcher, author, and coach, previously senior research fellow and professor at the University of Maryland's Robert H. Smith School of Business, and has had leadership roles at World 50 Labs, EY, and Accenture. Carlos, good afternoon.
And good to be back after our summer break. Nice to see you again.
Summer is over. My kids are back to school tomorrow. I had to kick them out one more day out of the house so they won't interrupt our podcast. But tomorrow they're back to school, and my wife's a very happy woman.
There you go, back to regular life.
Exactly.
Kids in school as it's supposed to be.
Mm-hmm. How have you been?
Good summer. My son went back to school yesterday. So yeah, like you, getting back into the swing of school routines and fall. Mm-hmm. Good to be back.
So it was a tough week for the market yesterday, led by this NVIDIA stuff. NVIDIA's market cap fell $279 billion yesterday, largest single-day decline of any company in U.S. history, and largely due to what, Carlos? The missed expectations, and then today, more bad news is in the form of government subpoenas around competition.
Well, this brings up our issue, right? And the thing about NVIDIA is because it's become a bellwether of how people feel at a given day, right, about AI as a whole. And is this thing going to be the transformational force? A year ago, everybody decided that it was. What did the stock do, right? Quadrupled or something in the matter of a few months. And so it just is the barometer for the mood of Wall Street around this particular technology and what we think it's going to be as it goes, right? There goes the market these days, it seems. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I saw everything from, hey, this is the recession conversation popping up again. This is the trigger for the recession, to just, hey, this is finally leveled out. 3 weeks ago we were talking about, like you say, NVIDIA's biggest gains in
Right, yeah.
years, right? And now it seems to have corrected, but is it sort of the AI bubble has popped, and then now you have, this is the Justice Department kind of escalating their antitrust investigation, saying that they've restricted competition by making it difficult for people to switch to other suppliers and penalizing companies that don't use its chips exclusively. So and I think that came out today, really after the market dump yesterday.
And it's, again, right, remember, we've seen it with Google, we've seen it with Apple, with the App Store. NVIDIA seems so far ahead of everybody else, again, seems, right? Then people start to think, well, is there something happening behind the scenes with customers, and are they forcing them to do this? So this is just the price of being the bellwether for an entire technology. I don't know if we've really seen this, because even the internet, the .com boom, right, wasn't really just one company. Right now, to the average person, I think you say AI, you can think NVIDIA, right? And that's the issue. I can't imagine, or can't remember where we had this kind of a revolution, right? And it was all based on it seemed to be all based on the technology of just one single firm versus a collection of firms. I know there are other firms, we know that, but I think to the general perception is that it's NVIDIA that's driving this entire thing, or seems to be in the extremely dominant position, which is where they're going to get the attention they're getting, right?
Well, and so much so that Reuters is reporting that Intel is going to be potentially booted from the Dow average, and they're down like 50% over the last year. I think it's a year or two. So yeah, they may be too late into this game, and hence the concern about NVIDIA being just such a major player.
And the question is, if that's A, is it true, and B, can you maintain that, right? Then, because oftentimes it isn't true, And if it is, you're market signaled. And so competitors, I mean, classic economic theory says that competitors will come in and invest to catch up or take some of that share back from you. Is that's what's happening, and Nvidia is trying to maintain that position in ways that they shouldn't. We don't know that, right? But I really do think that the rush that we had into it, right, and the raise that it went through was nothing nobody ever seen before. So at some point there'll be an adjustment, and it becomes extremely sensitive to basically to mood, right, which is what we're seeing right now. A little tick this way, a little announcement that way, and now the market goes right in an extreme push one way or extreme push the other way, because everybody's trying to figure out what is this company really saying, not just about the company, right, but it's about really the entire technology or technologies that make up what we think of as AI right now.
Yeah.
It'll be like this because we don't really know most people don't really know what it is. And I spent the last month digging into AI on a project, and you really get a sense of like what I call like the inner circle and like the outer circle, right? And the inner circle, maybe it's 25, 30,000 people around the world who are the real core of these technologies. And then you have a much bigger circle that probably ends with the consultants, right? At Deloitte and Accenture making money from AI projects. It's become a technology that you can now deploy without having to know how to make it. It's just starting, right? And that wasn't the case. And so 5 years ago, and I think that's the real question: is this that will that continue, right? Will it become such a thing that it becomes an ubiquitous set of technologies that transform the way the world is going to operate, or is the market ahead of what's the reality based on what happened a year ago when this thing just exploded? It came on so fast right then. Again, I can't think of anything that we in a year, right? We went from, okay, this is one of those science fiction things, to all of a sudden there's ChatGPT, people are using it, it's changing the way a lot of things get done. And it's true.
Even us, right? I mean, we ERPA AI, we were starting to more and more use our Digital Enterprise Institute brand, and then all of a sudden this AI phenomenon kind of came back, and it dominates every conversation. Even most of the automation conversations we have today are within the context of AI.
And I think we are cross combined. In my car, I have the Google system, right? And so you start talking to Google in the car the way you would talk to ChatGPT, right? Find this or find that, and the system just answer. I don't understand your question. I understand your question. Like, well, ChatGPT does, right? So the answer may not be great, but they understood the question. And can you go back now? Once you've seen that, it's frustrating to go back to, okay, I got to restructure my question in a way that Google understands. Google suddenly seems really dumb, right? As an engine. So I think we've crossed that line. We're not going to go back, right? Whatever OpenAI is, ChatGPT is, that's what people want.
Yeah.
And so,
so by the way, Intel released a new chip design yesterday that's supposedly designed for AI focused computing. But you're right, and the last headline that I had, before we get to our main topic is according to Wall Street Journal, OpenAI is eyeing a valuation of more than $100 billion, and claiming that there's some people pursuing that, the likes of Apple and Nvidia, believe it or not, according to the Journal and Bloomberg. So, and this is while they're kind of in this arms race, to use that overused term, with the likes of Google and Meta, who's also supposed to release their new product in the next couple months.
The other interesting thing, well, before we go back to we'll go to our topic, there was a great article, very interesting article that I read this week about AI starting to kind of absorb its own mistakes. And so there's now been enough work done, right, or enough information created through AI, a lot of it which is wrong, that it now is part of that unstructured data that it's absorbing. So it's entering, or the article suggested that it might be entering at least part of it, right, into kind of a negative loop where its mistakes then feed future mistakes, right? And then there was this risk of the thing just absorbing and reprocessing errors, and it becomes this error recirculator, right, rather than information generator. So you definitely sense this, the way in which these things go wrong. And as usual, right, our in the tech world, we sort of make it and then fix the problems as they appear. But I thought that was an interesting thing, that it's one of the downsides of the fact that it exploded and it's now everywhere is that it's creating bad data for the machine to learn from. And now you get this other problem, right, where it's creating its own errors, or it's laying the groundwork for its own errors. So we'll see.
Hey, I just realized there's one more topic I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, especially as I know you're such a big fan of Elon.
Yes.
X is now blocked in Brazil. What do you think of that headline today?
Correct. So I think the story is that the Supreme Court, the head judge, ordered them to take down some accounts for spreading misinformation or whatever, something that was objectionable to the court. I assume the government, of course, Musk/X refused. They were told that if they didn't, they were going to be shut down and fined. I think it's $9,000 a day. So the whole site just went dark, right? Unless you've got a VPN. So yeah, what I read this morning was that people didn't realize just how much Brazil drives. Apparently, it's one of the most online countries in the world, and a whole chunk of X is gone. So it's an interesting strategy.
Well, it brings up this question of, is this a political thing? Is this a government censorship thing? Or is this just, these platforms, X being probably the biggest culprit recently, a government's going to start stepping in and saying just certain platforms are just out of control and breeding the wrong kinds of things, and so we're just gonna up and block them. And by the way, they're going for not only did they freeze Starlink's assets for initially rejecting the order, but that $9,000 fine is for individuals who are accessing X.
Okay.
And if they catch you using a VPN to access it, you could be fined as well. So they're going after the company and the individual.
And the man, huh? Exactly. Well, we have this interesting thing. These platforms have national influence, right? So on the one hand, you say, well, yeah, it's killing free speech. On the other hand, it can shape a society, right? If it's shaping it in the wrong way, I don't know if the other question is, did X sign agreements when it set up shop in Brazil that say it has to abide by certain rules, and this was in the agreement, and now they're I don't know what they're saying. Is they're saying that this is not part of what they signed up for, or they back in the day when it was Twitter agreed that they had the power to request accounts to be canceled, and now because it's now X, for whatever reason, they're not honoring their agreement. So I don't know enough about X to know that if they're allowed to operate in country B or C, does that mean they have to sign? Or right? Can you just open yourself up to anybody? And also, do they have offices there? Are there employees? All these kinds of things.
Right? That's part of it. Yeah, it's partially the fact that there's nobody there. From what I was reading, that they feel like they can hold accountable or basically put in jail. So I think they want that accountability. But it's also interesting when you have maybe is this some sort of attack on competitiveness or capitalism, in the sense that it's both owned by the same guy, right? Same, right. So now all of a sudden you're going after Starlink. I'm not sure if there's other ISPs that they went after as part of that. But the regulation environment is heating up, and that's a good segue.
Boring at X. We know that.
Every time I see an X headline, I'm tempted to ignore it, knowing you just love talking about it. But it's hard not to be in the headlines, see them in the headlines. Well, so let's talk about our main topic, which is AI price fixing. This came out of an article in the Atlantic that you sent me, Carlos. So maybe set it up for everybody, because the article,
other articles that have now sort of picked up on the story, and it's about a company called RealPage. And what the company does is it's a website for landlords. So you sign up to be a subscriber, and you submit your information to RealPage. It collects information from all for landlords who are also subscribers, say in the market, and then it suggests to you what you should charge in rent. And so what seems to be happening is that the recommendation is allowing landlords to, in effect, collude on price, right? Because they all know that if they take the recommendation, the rents get pushed higher and higher. And in some markets, it's a dominant platform. So what you've got effectively is collusion without collusion, right? So if in the old days, and the latest article I read about, used the example of a chemical called lysine that was years ago used. There was a collusion case, and people had to fly. Executives flew to resorts where they would meet and decide, okay, you get to make this much, you get to price it at this point. You needed actual collaboration to collude. This allows you to collude, right, via the AI and let it do the work for you, which is something difficult because in the current law, you have to show that there was intent to collude, that there was actual collusion. It can't be a byproduct of something so far. And that's why there are two bills. Amy Klobuchar has one, somebody else has another one, that are trying to adjust the law to take into account a collusion that could happen through AI, right? And there's one other thing I'll note. There was a speech, I think, that was given a few years ago where somebody proposed, one of the regulators proposed, what was called the Bob test, right? And so you ask yourself, if Bob were doing X, would that be okay? So in this case, if Bob were collecting information from all the landlords, if Bob was suggesting what the price is, if everybody was doing what Bob was saying, that wouldn't be okay, right? But because if you replace Bob with AI or real page, then that's exactly what's happening. So it does seem on the surface that it is allowing, right, disallowing competition and enabling people who are supposed to be competing on a dimension like price to kind of understand the price that works out best for everybody on their side. Mm-hmm.
So to me, there's two questions here. One is the algorithm actually, designed to be colluding? And and then the second question is, if so, what do we do about it? Because like you say, the article talks to a few legal scholars that basically say it's going to be very, very difficult to prove that based on the way the laws are currently written. But let's take the first one, right? I mean, I guess the question is, what are they saying as far as, whether or not this was like, is this a byproduct? Like, is it de facto colluding just because it was built for a good purpose and now it's accidentally doing that? Or is it more of
that real page knows what it's doing, right? And it says that you have to be a customer, you have to accept its recommendations. So they're not really recommendations if you have to accept them, or you lose access to the site. So that's where things get especially tricky, because it says if you want to keep getting the feed, you must do what the feed tells you to do. So they could say, oh, we don't set the price, but you are setting the price, because if you don't set the price the way you tell them to, then they lose access. And everybody understands that it's, the word is optimization, right? Well, optimization means what? The most revenue to the landlord per square foot. And so it's the algorithm knows that the best way to maximize revenue is if all landlords don't compete, right? If we all agree that we will all stay at this point or above this point, then they all win that way, because no one's willing to go below that price. And it seems clearly intended to do that, right? To maximize the revenue. I don't know, why else would you sign up, right? And you're not going to sign up because you're trying to figure out how low to put your price.
Right? No, but that's not necessarily collusion, right? That's a really, really good tool, right? I mean, there's tools in the marketplace that help retailers figure out, what they should sell their goods at different times of the year based on supply and demand. That's not necessarily, I mean, I guess you could argue it's price gouging in certain situations, but it's not necessarily or explicitly colluding. It's price tools.
Well, you just need a different word, right? You think about airlines and how often you shop for a plane ticket, and it's suspicious that all the tickets are more or less the same price, right? When again, theoretically, these people are supposed to be competing for your business, but everybody has more or less the same price on the ticket, then Is everybody else watching what everybody else is pricing? Sure. And why would you then undercut if you know that no one else is going to do it? So maybe it's not collusion again in the classical sense of the term, but there's some other active name that we need to come up, which is price coordination, unfair, or whatever it happens to be. Because the whole idea is that the market's supposed to, regulators are supposed to ensure that the markets are competitive, right? And that competitors are competing, that people expect that in the market. If it turns out that they're not, that's always been illegal. By the outcome is what is illegal, right? Or at least unwanted, that companies don't compete. They're supposed to in a capitalist system. And this brings up the other bigger issue, which is, again, we talk often about this is a capitalist country. But when you pull back the covers, right, open the hood on so many markets, it's not quite that case, right? And this is another example of, well, yeah, in a truly capitalist market, you'd have price competition, which is not happening here. So, okay, it enabled by what means? If the old days you had to get in a plane and do it at a resort, now you're doing it through the AI, and this is the issue, right? We see it in other markets as well. So, call it collusion, call it something else. Is it capitalistic? Is it good for capitalism that this technology exists?
Well, that's a fair question. I what I was gonna say is, to me, it's about intent, right? If you create something with the goal of stymieing, competition, then that's a different story. But if the technology does that, if the technology solves a business problem and has side effects, then should we stop that, or is that just normal market evolution? No different than if the guy across the street from me puts his house on the market and it's overpriced and some dope buys it, my home value goes up as a result of that, right? Is that collusion, or is that just market evolution, and someone's willing to pay more, so I reap the benefits? And not that I sat there and told the guy, hey, sell it for more and I'll give you a cut, right?
Okay, but if everybody was doing that, right, and there was no, and you're trying to buy into that market, I'm saying, it's that good for that market, right? And go back to intent versus, I think it's outcome. Back to the question of the executives going to some resort. What if I invited them because I like the executives? So I just want to have a party. So I invite all the executives to this fancy resort. After a few rounds, we decide to collude, right? It wasn't my intent. I didn't invite you to collude, but you did. And so that wouldn't make it okay.
But that's been going on. I mean, if you don't think that's happened, I mean, that's happened in every industry since the beginning of business. I mean, I'm not saying it's right or legal, but I mean, it's. Well, so my question is, why is this different? Is this better
right,
or worse?
Capitalist theorists would say it's neither right nor legal, which is why we have antitrust law and antitrust regulators, which is to stop this stuff from happening. And I, it is, maybe it's a Sisyphean task, right? At times when you feel, well, or I solve it here and then it appears somewhere else. But that's the case with regulatory work. I think in this case, the reason why the case is getting so much attention, I think it's because it is one of the first examples of AI, right? Enabling something without you having to do the work. It's like collusion made easy, right? I don't even have to do the work. There was a famous story about a book back in 2011, I think it was, that was priced for $23 million on Amazon from two sellers. And I think they were the only ones that had, or one of the few who had it. So they priced the book at 23 million. Like the algorithm told them that was the price. And so are people watching each other on Amazon and seeing what they're charging?
But again, is the intent really collusion, or is it a byproduct? I mean, you can make the same analogy with, look at Zillow, right? My father-in-law is in real estate, right? It used to be in the olden days, people would call him up and he would do an appraisal on your house and tell you what it's worth and show you the comps or whatever. Now, Zillow dictates it, and he can tell people that Zillow's wrong all you want, but they pull up Zillow and say, well, if Zillow says my house is worth this, then this is what I want to get for it. Mm-hmm. I don't know if Zillow is making money by doing that, but it's a tool that has certainly changed that marketplace. Whether good or bad is not the topic, but I think it's the evolution of that marketplace where people trust the algorithm that Zillow's put together over a local real estate agent's opinion.
Well, I think the problem too with this case is that I guess they were really focused on certain markets. Maybe DC was one of them, where it was the majority share, right, of the landlords were basically pricing off a real page. So there might be a case where, listen, if it's 20-30% of a market, there's still enough freedom or activity that would say that this isn't really not setting the market right price for rents. In the case of certain markets, apparently it's a preponderance of the landlords, and so that means that the website is setting the price, right? So does the website is that what we want? I guess, right? Is the question.
Yeah, I would say let's assume for argument's sake that these guys didn't. I mean, it'd be interesting to find out that all these landlords got together and are all investing in this company through a shell corporation. Right. All right, let's put that scenario aside for a second. But then it's like, does it meet the criteria? Like, how is it different than a retailer? I mean, you go into whatever, Best Buy, right? And what do? You go on Amazon, you scan the barcode. Amazon has a tool that actually pulls up by a barcode and shows you the price on Amazon.
I think the difference is the rule says you must take the recommendation, right? If there are pricing tools for retailers, sure, they make recommendations, and they really are recommendations. You don't get kicked off the system if somebody walks into your store and you having a sale, right? In this case, it seems that if you do not turn around and price it the way the thing tells you, then you're in violation of the agreement.
And that may be it. That may be the factor.
Yeah. It isn't, because then you say it's not recommending, it is price setting, right? And so the real page is setting the price of homes in this market, and it's doing it by collecting information from all of the suppliers, right? And then telling them all, set it here, and nobody better go below this price. So, right, it looks like de facto, right, that's the interesting thing. Now, that's what makes an interesting case, right? You're right. I could argue, if I'm a landlord, hey, I didn't include anybody. I just did what the system told me to do. I'm acting on my own.
I mean, you could do a manual, right? You could go on Craigslist and say, well, I'm trying to sell this snowblower, and everybody else is charging this price. So, I got it for free. I'm not, I'm going to make money on it either way. But if I can get $700 for it instead of $300 for it, why shouldn't I? Is that collusion?
Well, it also reminds you of, you remember the movie A Beautiful Mind, right? So it's the story of John Nash, the Prince mathematician. There's the great scene where he and his friends are at a bar apparently on campus, and one of them mentions this beautiful girl into the bar, and all the guys are going to compete for her attentions. And Nash has the insight that no, Adam Smith was wrong, right? The market doesn't work best when we all compete. The market works best when we all collaborate, right, and pick anybody but her. And so that becomes the Nash equilibrium, right, idea.
Yeah,
so in this case, you see the same thing. They're saying the market actually, as a participant and as at least as a seller, right, you're better off not competing. You're actually better off by, in however you can do it, right, agreeing not to go below this price and assuming that algorithm will just continue to raise price over time. Now, does it get to the point where, my defense would be, look, if this is bad, eventually people will just stop renting there, right? They will just.
Well, and that's to me the market factor, right? If you have the option to just not go there, like you'd say, well, okay, well, the system is forcing you to go with their recommendation, but the renters aren't forced to rent there, right?
Right. Mm-hmm. That I guess I'm sure that's their argument. Hey, nobody's forcing you to live here. Now you say, look, I have to live in DC, and RealPage controls 60% of the market, or 70% of the market eventually, then do I really have much of a choice? I have to go to RealPage. And maybe that is also where the issue gets especially tricky, which is not just what it's doing, but has it got a level of concentration in the market that it effectively is not allowing competition, right? It has so much in the market, it's pricing through RealPage that even if you wanted to, you couldn't.
I think that's what's going to happen. It's going to be more like the attacks on Uber, meaning it'll be at a local city and state level. Like already San Francisco, has passed an ordinance banning the sale and use of software that combines non-public competitor data to set, recommend, or advise on rent and occupancy levels. So, certain governments are going to go in there like they did with Uber and say, hey, not in London, not here, not there. I think it'd be tough on it because, like you say, like so they're saying the Atlantic article says that they're controlling up to 60% of multifamily building units in 40 markets. But
Yeah.
RealPage is saying we only represent 7% of the landlords in the country, right? So that's not a monopoly, right?
Right. Okay. So when you've got 60% in 40 metro markets, you're not only that, but you're actually at that point, you're actually setting prices nationally, right? Dan? So you could say, well, I'll move to the city. It doesn't matter. I'm going to go live in Cincinnati versus Cleveland. But guess what? They've got both markets sort of locked down anyway. So it doesn't matter where you go.
And it's Arizona and Washington D.C. attorney generals that are passing that or trying to pass that. So
we get to the bigger question we've talked about a lot on the show, right? Which is this technology moves so quickly, and here we have an example of it creating a problem, right? And the legal structure just isn't equipped to kind of get there. Is it going to get fixed because we say you can't do this, or will they change the software in some way, right? Because we know people do that, right? Suddenly you recode in a way that satisfies the letter of the law, but the effect is still going to be the same.
I mean, part of me looks at it and says, this is already happened. I mean, the government price fixes things, right? The government goes into certain industries and says you're allowed to make X amount of margin on these products, right? We did it with Medicaid recently, right? We went in and said this is, and maybe rightfully so, the profit margins were 10,000% or whatever they were, but the government's come in and said you're allowed to sell it for this margin over this percentage, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I mean that's already happening. Where this gets really interesting to me is, are the algorithms at some point outside of human control, are they gouging on their own? Or there's a part of this article where they're saying, hey, the technology, to your point earlier in our headlines, maybe the technology, if that's what it's trained to do, gets more data and actually does it on purpose, actually, creates a dynamic that people don't even realize it's creating. And it's actually essentially gouging or creating certain biases on its own. That's where it gets kind of concerning.
I think also you have, as we know, right, there are some things that are sort of necessary. I mean, for example, I know that milk pricing is regulated, highly regulated, actually, right? Why? Because we consider it this sort of staple of life. And so for families, especially with children, so we don't allow the market to charge whatever you want for this. Maybe housing is the same thing, right? But you're going to wind up with, look, if AI is setting the price of Porsche 911s, who cares, right? It's nobody has to buy one. If you want to buy one, you're an informed consumer. Pay whatever you want to pay. With things like milk or the roof of your head, there are constraints that have to be put in to make sure that there is some competitive level to this, right? Because we're talking about something that people don't have people don't. It's not optional that you have a home for most people, right? It's something you have to go acquire in some way, and if you're not, we like to think that the supply and demand laws are at work there, and the market's operating correctly as we think of it. Maybe 10 years from now, AI has redefined what correct market looks like, right? Maybe there's AI on both sides. Maybe somebody comes along and goes, okay, well, here's an AI tool that allows a renter to do things that they can't do today.
Although, I think it's AI seems to be held to a higher benchmark, and maybe rightfully so, right? But because of the scale that it can happen at, right? The other example I was thinking of is, if I own a gas station and I see I'm the cheapest gas station on the street and everybody else raised their prices, I'm probably raising my price a little bit, right? I mean, that's just, is that coercion? Are they doing that on purpose? No, but I'm able to walk down the street and see that I'm the cheapest gas station. So even if I want to continue being the cheapest gas station, I can probably raise my prices 10 cents a gallon, still be cheapest, but based on what my competitors are doing. So I think some of that's just, natural evolution. But, what scares me is some of these, over broad brushstroke regulations, like the thing you mentioned before. A handful of Senate Democrats introduced this bill, and they basically want to update all the laws to automatically presume price fixing whenever competitors are sharing sensitive information through an algorithm or a platform. And that's to me, a very broad brushstroke.
The other thing is that that's something that they didn't talk about in the article, is that a lot of these things are negotiable, right? So the question is, are we dealing with like the price, or is it like MSRP on a car?
Right.
Right? And I think there's also variation in that. There are probably landlords where whatever the price is the price, and there are lots of them, and I know there are, because this is how real estate works, right? Where you say, well, okay, I'll make this offer, we negotiate this, that term, whatever it happens to be. So maybe what it's doing is setting MSRP, right? And again, same thing you said, car, right? Does BMW know what Audi charges for a car? Of course they do. Does that affect them? Of course it does, right? And so does that mean that at the end of the day, there isn't some negotiating mechanism that sets a different price?
That's a
Right.
perfect example, Carlos. That's a perfect example. I'll tell you why, because I just went through this. I just bought a car, right? And so, you know, you go online, you get the MSRP, however, in theory, that's based on the cost to make the car and the overhead, blah, blah. So it's theoretically what the, right? But then you go to TrueCar, you go to some of these sites that say,
Right.
this is what the market is paying for your car, right? And you can actually put in a number. It'll tell you whether it's a good deal, a great deal, not a good deal, whatever. And then you take that information with you to the dealership. And I speak to 5 different dealerships. And one dealership's like, we can't do it. Go fly a kite. Have a nice day. One dealer is like, well, I'll honor that price that you got from TrueCar.
Right.
And then another dealer is like, I'll give you a better deal. I got an incentive to hit this month. I'm 1 car short of my quota, and we're going to take a loss on your car to get the incentive, right? So, you know, that's a perfect example.
And I've heard dealers, but I don't know if it's true or not, say, look, sometimes we don't even care, like to your point about the margin on the car, because we want the service revenue, right? And so there's that side of it as well, or they want the financing revenue if you end up leasing. There's so many ways you make money in a car, not just the margin on the car. There's if you end up paying a lease and the $3,000 or $4,000 in the lease are cost of money charges, there's profit there. There's profit when they service, they charge it back to the OEM. And so you're right. The thing that wasn't clear from these articles is, what is the effective right price? We know what they're setting the rent at on the website, let's say, but is that what people are actually paying? Number one, or is there that? And also, how often does anybody break that in other mechanisms? Because we know in certain cases where there has been collusion, sooner or later somebody comes along and goes, well, I don't care anymore, right? I want to share. So I'm going to go ahead and adjust the price to pick up market share. We see that happen in certain markets. So is that happening in these markets, or is it really that does RealPage really set, is it setting rents effectively for everybody? And at least most of its market, and these rents are really what people are paying. And again, what are the consumers think about this, right? And how, in other words, the other thing that's not clear is, let's say RealPage didn't exist. How far off are we talking about, right, Dan? Is it 2%, 1%, 10%, right? Is it a significant, I guess if you call it deformation, right, of what the market would be setting? Or are we talking about minor tweaks one way or the other? It's something which also wasn't clear. Maybe they just don't know at this point, right? There hasn't been enough work to look at, say, how does the RealPage price compare to what, at least conceptually, it would have been, let's say, pre-RealPage.
Right. Yeah, to me, it's a question of, is this just finally reflecting what the market already is at,
right,
or is it fundamentally changing the market?
Right. Is it distorting the price that's actually taking place? That we see the fact that the OEMs know what, in the car business, know what everybody's pricing, seems not to distort final pricing, right? Because there's so much competition. In this particular case, is that what's really happening, or is it not? And then again, right, the bigger question of are in other markets, will this repeat itself, right? In other markets, are we going to see this in other things where you go, okay, AI is enabling price fixing, right, in a way, right, or collusion in a completely different way than we would have thought about it before, right? Again, we thought of it as an active that required sellers to collaborate, right, proactively, and you had to have intent. Now, is that going to change to simply be, if what results from an AI is price fixing, then that's illegal, whether you meant to or not. If that's what's actually happening in the marketplace, then yeah, the regulator going to step in and adjust that in some way. And I think it's
hard to. I think it's going to be
right.
Yeah, I think it's going to be very hard to prove, right? Because again, right now you have to prove that there was an explicit agreement If this gets passed, in the Senate, that's like, to me, oversimplification, the other side of the spectrum. But, the FTC, this has apparently been on the FTC's radar. I mean, in 2017, they had a speech at a conference, and they were, the commissioner was warning about what she called algorithmic collusion.
Right, that was Greenwell housing, right?
Yeah, and less about collusion. I think it's a more fun, as these governments regulate, and as companies think about risk, I think, maybe this is part of a bigger conversation, which is dynamic pricing, which is, like you talked about with the airlines. Like, should an airline charge more based on demand? Should Ticketmaster, is that just supply and demand, or is that price gouging? I've always wondered why is it different? And maybe you say, like you said, gas and milk is different than entertainment. But, why is it okay for Ticketmaster to charge or a concert venue to charge a premium on a particular show that's in demand, but the gas stations can't charge more when, there's something going on where, you'd want to buy gas quickly?
Right. And again, right, they go to this. I was just going to bring up Ticketmaster. It's an interesting case, right, where if we say musicians at the top level, look at what each one is making of a ticket prices, right? And so if somebody goes on tour and is charging $500 for a base seat, then okay, when I go on tour, I want $500 for a seat, right? And it just goes on from there. And that's kind of what's happened, right? When you have this, sometimes it's called the rock star economy, where people collect all the benefits. And you're right, if Taylor Swift decides, you know what, I don't care, $10,000 is the buy-in, right, for one of my shows. Don't like it, you don't have to come. Yeah, you might have negative press, but we wouldn't say that was illegal. She can do whatever she wants with whatever she wants to set in terms of the price to access one of her shows. She's the supplier, right? I guess we make a distinction again between something which is truly optional. Nobody says you have to go to there, right? But we think of families having to buy milk, people having to buy gas, having to get a rent. So maybe that's where the line gets drawn, right? Where you say, in markets that are essential goods, that are largely non-optional for the majority of people, there has to be mechanisms in place that will not allow AI or anything else to kind of create these effects. Ultimately, taking a trip someplace, a rock concert or whatever it is, right, a movie ticket, right?
But to my point is, it's not even about AI. That's philosophical. If that's the case, then you have to stop the pharmaceutical companies from charging more money in the U.S. for the same drugs that they charge everywhere else, right?
Yeah, and the thing I think for me of the article was this unintended consequence, right, or intended consequence, and just simply again that we have a technology or a set of technologies that are changing markets and how markets operate, and the traditional regulatory concept of what a problem in that market looks like isn't the way it manifests under AI, right? We have this like 18th century, like robber baron era, right, of what is collusion, and we're in 2024, and here there's what these technologies are doing, creating a whole different set of issues that conceptually distort markets in ways we don't want as capitalists. And so, all right, now, how does the regulatory framework keep up with these technologies? And it's been that way forever. I mean, as technologies advance things, right, then you say, all right, how does the law reflect or change to keep up with these things? We've seen it with patent law, we've seen it with a bunch of other things, right? Even with AI, we've talked about this before, right? You write a book, ChatGPT reads it, stores it, gives your work to others for free. You're not getting paid a royalty for that, right? What if its answers based on a book that you wrote or research you did, which you put time and effort and sweat into you? In theory, people should pay you just to benefit from your work. If it becomes this intermediary, then it's not. So now that system, right, of copyright and ownership of intellectual property has basically gone out the window. Okay.
Yes, but my question, because you always bring us to some broad philosophical discussion at the end of these sessions, so I'll do it this time. Is that, you say in theory we're supposed to get paid for our writing, and yes, the conventional framework is yes, you should, but is that just the natural evolution? Like, I have this debate with my wife all the time about the environment, right? And she'll say, hey, humans are destroying the earth, and all of our building is creating changes in the populations of animals and what have you. And I get that, right, to a large extent, but the devil's advocate in me can't help myself. And I say to her, well, if you believe humans are part of the ecosystem, then is our building just the natural evolution of the ecosystem? Or if we are the apex predator, if we are the alpha, is that just what we do as part of natural evolution? Is this natural evolution?
Well, I think the other argument there is simply that it's bad for the apex predator, right? Because I was watching an interview one time, and somebody said, "Oh," talking to a climate scientist, and they said, "Oh, the Earth's in trouble." And he said, "No, let's get it clear. The Earth isn't in trouble. We are, because our window of existence is very tiny.
Ironic, right? Yeah.
We're going to be gone. Earth is going to be just fine. Like, Earth's not going anywhere. We're not going to ruin the Earth, right? We're going to ruin the very small window in which human life can exist. If we're gone, Earth is probably better off, right?
Maybe that's the natural evolution. We don't have a natural predator, so that's
let it run its course, because human beings are kind of a cancer on Earth. So heat it up, right? Buy the big cars, buy whatever, because the sooner you do that, the sooner the window shrinks to the point where we're gone, and the Earth can get back to doing what it's doing without this problematic species, which is taking a lot and not giving much back. And so, yeah, I would argue that the biggest argument for being aware of these things, that it is truly just self-preservation. If this apex predator wants to continue to be the apex predator, right?
But how do you know how much? I guess the question is, how do you know how much you should put your finger on the scale? So, for example, where I live, the deer population. So, first of all, they made hunting deer basically illegal. Yeah. Now we have an overpopulation of deer in the area where I live. So now the county has hired sharpshooters to go around the woodslands and kill deer. And I'm thinking to myself, now I'm going the other way on the debate. I'm like, why are we killing the deer? And my wife's like, well, because people are hitting them with their cars. I'm like, okay, well, if we hit them with our cars and they die, that's sad, but then they die. Why are we proactively going to kill them, right? So, how do you know? And then my buddies he goes, well, it's more humane. But I'm like, who gets to decide that, right? We're going to start killing things now to help them. Like, how do we do that?
Well, back to the climate thing. Well, this is you introduce this species to fix this other problem, and now you need another species.
Like another problem.
Because we can just talk about Florida, right? And its collection of imported species. But it seems that if you read the literature, right, we've already kind of cast the die on climate, right? We're not really adjusting very much. And it seems that we're headed to the point where some big chunk of human life will be devastated by climate. And then I don't think it's all going to go away, but there'll be some serious adjustment over the next century in how people live, because it's too late. Right? The thing is already kind of gone on its way. So maybe, to your point, the Earth will correct by getting rid of the worst of the apex predator, or at least
maybe AI will too. Maybe AI will boot out maybe it'll do like a median thing. Just get rid of the high score, the low score, and figure out the median.
Well, you have a lot of trust.
I said maybe. I didn't say it was going to. I said maybe.
Well, listen, again, to me, it's a conclusion, right? Thinking about this, it's just a very interesting set of articles about this. What I take away from it is that we do have this technology that's changing markets, right? And I think if you care about well-functioning markets, and I think anybody who claims to care about a capitalist system would want markets to function well, because if not, then that's not what this is, right? So back to the question of how much and in what ways can regulation stop these things or adjust them when they appear, because this is not the last one, right? We're going to see more and more of this going forward. And what's interesting to me is just that fact that it removes the need to collude for you to get a colluding outcome, right? So now you have an outcome that has now been sort of separated from the process that traditionally created it, right? So we define the crime, right, because of the input more than the output. And now this is shifting and saying, I don't care if you didn't collude, you ended up with the effect of a colluding group. And so we're going to adjust that. And that's a really radical thing, right? That's a big change where it's not what you did, is what resulted from the technology, whether you intended to it or not. We don't really care anymore, which is what these bills are saying, right? I don't care if you want to collude or you don't want to collude, if what comes out looks like it, or is the same thing as if you had, right? You know what I mean, right, Dan? Like if you had done it, this would have been the outcome, then we're going to step in. And that's, to me, the really big question. If you did nothing wrong, but because of technology, you got something that is the same as if you had, the regulator is saying, we have the right to adjust what you're doing based on the outcome, not because of what you did or wanted to do or intended to do. And that's something that I don't think we've seen before. I'm not a lawyer, I'm not an expert in this space, but it seems like a pretty big shift in regulatory philosophy that's taking place. And again, one other way in which AI continues to change society.
Yeah, we saw it a few months ago with the FTC ruling around AI calling, right? There's a lot of really interesting use cases for outbound AI calling. And then some scammer created a voice that sounded like Biden that was saying things that weren't true. And then the FTC just waved the magic wand, and now all AI calling of any kind outbound is illegal, right? So, yeah, it's again, is it tipping the scale on the natural evolution, or is it the necessary safeties that we need? That's the debate.
Well, I always, my favorite rule that I invented, the Lin effect, right, which is technology in its first incarnation, a revolution will always create more problems than it solves. And this is another example of that. AI will create more problems than it solves in its first, in incarnation. This is what we're seeing. This is just another example of that. And we're going to see more of this. Right? So
maybe that's the solution. Maybe the solution is that AI has to remedy itself. How about that? Here are the parameters, and you gotta, not only, and that's the advantage, right? It can, you said at the beginning, right? It can also correct itself.
Right. Or it can make itself worse. That's the thing. We don't, both outcomes, and one seems more likely than the other, right? Which is that it'll make itself worse based on history of other things. But yeah, this is like I said, it's interesting that it's forcing a change in the way we thought about a set of laws that have been around for over a century.
Yeah.
In a matter of a couple of years, the technology goes a century worth of legal frameworks have become obsolete to some extent, right? Not that they don't cover the traditional kind, but here we have a whole new thing that says this is an outcome it's an output without the input, right? Which
sounds like we're back to politics.
Well, it's almost like saying, hey, there's somebody dead, but they were never murdered.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Future crime division.
Right. Exactly. So here's a dead person, but nobody committed the crime. But okay, so what do we do about that? Here we have a crime, right? Here we have a bad outcome, right? A crime, the output crime, but no crime input, right? And so we have to now redefine the input, right, as whatever it is that RealPage is doing, which is what these laws are doing. They're saying, no, that because there's a body, it must have a murderer.
Yeah, so it's kind of like manslaughter versus murder, right? Like you maybe you didn't intend it to happen, but it still happened.
Right. The AI allowed you to do this, to commit this crime without committing this crime. You might look at it a different way, right? To say this thing allows you to have broken the law without ever have broken the law, right? So we now have to redefine whatever it is that that the AI was doing that resulted in the dead body as murder, right? So interesting times as always.
Carlos, good topic. Thanks for sharing that article. And we'll be back. Thanks for joining us, everybody. We're back in 2 weeks on Wednesday, September 18th. Is that for real, Carlos? We're at the middle September.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Noon Eastern, 9 Pacific. In the meantime, go to irpaai.com for more resources or to schedule a free health check or order the possible briefing. Thanks, everybody. Have a great week.
Everybody for watching. See you next time, Dan. Bye-bye.